Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel Tour update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest vis-a-vis Lebanon, Gaza, Iran, Yemen, and other theaters of interest to us, it's important to note that today we mark day 677 since the atrocities that were committed by the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates against the communities of southern Israel on October 7th of 2023. Since then, of course, 50 hostages remain in Hamas captivity. Up to 20 of them are believed to be alive, and we are hopeful that they will return to their loved ones as speedily as possible. But nonetheless, there is currently a delegation of the Islamist Hamas in Egypt deliberating a potential new proposal for some type of a negotiated solution to this conflict. But we are waiting for additional details, and before we're able to really broaden our horizon on that, let's introduce our experts for today, to include Mr. Amir Oren, our TV7 editor-at-large, Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, who is formerly served as the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior IDF intelligence officer. And last but certainly not least, our dear friend and colleague who is currently also in Israel, Professor Russell Berman, who is the director of the Middle East Working Group at Hoover Institution at Stanford University, formerly a senior advisor to the policy planning staff at State Department in Washington, D.C. It's great to see all three of you. Mr. Owen, if I may ask for a brief understanding of the current state of play vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip.
So the central figure in public discourse in Israel nowadays seems to be Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, the chief of the general staff of the IDF, because of his duties and his dual role. He is, of course, the recipient of political guidance from the government, or more specifically from the Security Cabinet, and he is supposed to supervise the planning done by the General Staff, by the Southern Command, the Air Force, and the other members of his staff. Now, General Zamir proposed another plan, not the one which was adopted a week ago Thursday, but nevertheless, he is now directing the staff work. He has convened the generals and colonels and gave them the so-called central idea of the plan to encircle Gaza City and take control of it. And later on, if Hamas does not come to the table, probably proceed to another destination, the so-called central camps, central refugee camps, which are not really camps, they are urban locations now. So General Zamir is now under the public microscope. His exchanges with his superior, his political superior, Defense Minister Katz, as well as his directives to the troops.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. General Sofrin, when we're talking about Gaza, to what degree is, in your assessment, Hamas in a position to succumb to Israel's demands, America's demands at that, with regard to a reasonable solution to the current state of play, since irrespective of what they want or international pressure at that, the standing leadership in Hamas will not stay. And that is something that, of course, is reduced as time progresses, but nonetheless, that is a pivot that is expected to occur at some point in time, and hopefully before Gaza City and subsequently the central urban areas of this enclave are completely destroyed.
I think that Hamas is playing on time like always. It is, first of all, it is concentrated right now by trying to gain some, or to maybe design a new equation with the Egyptians that been unable to release the people and to get to some ceasefire that will be long enough for them to reorganize. And they won't give up for the time being for their what we call the ultimate demand that they claim all the time, ever since the first day of the war, that the end of the war should be with the international guarantees that Israel will not attack them one more time. Second, that Israel will withdraw from Gaza Strip totally, and that Hamas is not going to leave Gaza. Maybe some of the leaders will go for exile, just like Arafat in 1982 or in 83. But nevertheless, most of them, or most of the people will remain there. They will not give, or they will not be willing to disarm. They will not give up all the weapon systems. So I believe that in the end of the day, they will stay there, maybe under another regime that will be organized together with other countries in the Middle East. But I don't see Hamas giving up, waving the white flag, and leaving. Everybody is leaving Gaza and getting out of there, just like some of our ministers wish it could be.
Indeed. Well, what could happen, and this is something that I believe is likely to happen once a new regime takes over, since I do agree with you. The families and clans that are loyal to the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood and are as such full-fledged members of Hamas, irrespective of what people like, they cannot be targeted since they are non-combatants. So Israel abides by international law, and therefore these people are spared. But nonetheless, once a new regime enters, even if it's the Palestinian Authority, which I doubt has the capacity to do so, it's going to be quite detrimental to those clans, since those new Palestinian leaders will not abide by international law, irrespective of what Western societies might hope to see in the Palestinian street. Professor Russell Berman, is that something that the current critiques of Israel are taking into account?
Listen, I think it's a very dynamic situation right now. Hamas is committed to staying and operating in Gaza, but the United States is engaged in considerable diplomacy to find some opportunities for movement here. A question from the outside is, to what extent is the initiative that Netanyahu announced was it a week ago or so, now maybe longer, to go into Gaza City? How much of that is a genuine military prediction, and how much of that is a motivation for Hamas to initiate these new discussions with the Egyptians? You mentioned a new regime coming in. We're still far away from seeing what that regime might be. People talk optimistically about some international Arab League force, but I don't see any movement to put that together. The Palestinian Authority is not looked on as a possible candidate by the Israeli government, if I'm not mistaken. And if the Palestinian Authority were to come in, then we'd be rolling back to the same civil war moment that took place between the PA and Hamas in the past. A big question for me, Jonathan, is to what extent the population of Gaza, the clans that you mentioned, how much of them are in the pocket of Hamas? Are there parts of Gazan civil society, can one use the term civil society, that are not in Hamas and that would welcome an international government? All of these are unknowns.
Indeed. Well, despite the fact that many of those clans, just to give some insight, are split with different families affiliating themselves to different clans or different organizations, so to speak, in Gaza related to Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other groups. Nonetheless, in Gaza, when we're talking about the full-fledged Fatah members, in light of the takeover by Hamas and the blood feuds that emerged out of that transition, some of those families refused any type of affiliation to Hamas, and that is why there was such a long deadlock in intra-Palestinian mediation to try and find a viable solution between Fatah and Hamas, the two predominant parties or groups in Palestinian societies that are vigorous rivals at who is going to lead the so-called Palestinian people. But let's redivert our attention now, Mr. Oren, to Lebanon, where we are seeing a senior Iranian official coming to establish deliberations with Hezbollah, with the Lebanese government under President Joseph Aoun, following the cabinet's decision in Beirut to disarm this Iranian proxy called Hezbollah that has been, of course, decapitated by Israel from October 8th of 2023 up until last November of 24, specifically the 27th of November, when they forced or succumbed to an armistice in light of the fact that they were really a headless chicken running around, not really knowing how to cope with Israel's far superior tactics.
It's a desperate move on the part of Iran because Hezbollah has its interests, regardless of the directives it gets from Tehran and its gratitude for whatever support, financial and otherwise, that it has received over the decades. But nevertheless, it is first and foremost a Lebanese organization. It must get the support of the population. It is playing a part in the parliamentary or political game. And even more than that, the American, Saudi, perhaps French, and definitely Israeli vectors are now much more powerful than the Iranian one. It's a new ballgame, and the Iranian emissary would probably go back empty-handed.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your take on this as well. But if we may broaden the picture a little bit, naturally, the Iranians are hurting themselves with severe or an acute water problem, severe electricity blackouts throughout Iran. Their economy, the currency, the rial, is at a free fall as we're speaking. And the Iranians still feel comfortable enough to send emissaries to see how they can persist their malign activities throughout the region. Are they delusional to the scope of their ability? And to what degree is this overstretching themselves going to further diminish their capacity to hold on?
I think that in Iran, we should differ between what we call internal issues and external ones. The internal issues, which are under the direct control of what we call the president, Pezeshkian, is in a bad shape. Lack of water that as I saw this morning, water around Tehran will be sufficient until the mid of September and no more than that, because everything is getting dried. The second issue is what we call a short of electricity. We have a breakout of 7 to 10 hours a day, and they are in a very bad shape. But nevertheless, when you look at the other side of the hill and you look at the external issues, now they are building the capacity or trying to build back their capacity to be able to compete Israel better than they did on June, on our 12 days of fighting in June. And that means, first of all, that they are rearming themselves with mainly Chinese systems, anti-aircraft and maybe jets and other systems as well. And the second issue is trying to rebuild its capacity with what we call its proxies. And the main proxy is Hezbollah. Hezbollah is very weakened in Lebanon right now because, first of all, because of the blow that we gave it during our fighting until November 2024. Second, because the new leader, Naim Qassem, is a weak man. He's not as dominant as Nasrallah used to be. He cannot compete really with the government of his or the government and the president of the Lebanese country. And when Mr. Larijani came, Hezbollah received him with a warm welcome. But when he met with the president, Joseph Aoun, he told him that you cannot interfere within internal issues of Lebanon, and I ask you to leave and not to negotiate with anyone. And this is a strong message because, first of all, the Lebanese government is what we call turning them away. And same goes with Syria. And the Iranians are getting blow after blow, and it's not a very happy news for them.
Who would imagine that the president of Lebanon, sitting in Beirut with one of the most powerful people of the Ayatollah regime in Iran, could say such a statement? It's just really baffling to see the significant change that occurred in Lebanon in such a brief period of time. Professor Berman, are you optimistic in this context?
I'm relatively optimistic about the developments in Iran, but I believe the bigger picture is that Iran is going to have to give up on its grand strategy that's prevailed really since the Iraq War to work through proxies and keep wars away from its border. Iran has been defeated externally and it's been weakened internally. The water issue has been mentioned. Smart leadership in Iran would now consolidate to try to maintain the regime by giving up on all of its external imperial ambitions. I'm not looking forward to its continuing its nuclear program, but right now that's the ace in the hole that it has. It won't be able to rely on Lebanon, Syria, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure that within the Iranian leadership, there must be a range of positions. Maybe they want to try to maintain bridges to Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is going to end as a militia. It may continue as basically a Shiite interest regional party in the Lebanese parliament, and that's not a terrible outcome. This would be like the Irish Republican Army in the Irish Parliament.
Right. I mean, the fact that there are a couple 100,000 Shia people living in Iran, they need adequate representation naturally in parliament, and that is not something that will be denied of them, but they cannot be an extension of the Islamic Republic of Iran pushing for the Ayatollah regime's interests in the country and trying to deter Israel by doing so, of course, threatening the Lebanese state time and again over the course of the last several decades. With regard to the water situation in Iran, I think it's quite amazing. The last 5 years, the Iranians have been struggling with a perpetual drought, so to speak. The water has been diminishing, rainfall has been diminishing, but just in the last 4 months, the rainfall has dropped 40%, and we're talking here about historical figures. So this is something that the Iranians are very much frustrated with, and this may impact the regime's ability to steer itself with a thirsty nation from all aspects. But
Jonathan, if I may, you know, of course, that some 60 years ago, Israeli experts have helped the more arid districts of Iran by coming over, helping, developing agriculture, and especially with water treatment. And how about now the Israeli Air Force airdropping water pellets? Of course, it would be symbolically only. You can't do it in vast quantities, but nevertheless, it will show the population that Israel, rather than their own regime, is more concerned with their welfare.
Well, your suggestions are always uniquely put, and I appreciate that. But nonetheless, we are still at a state of war. And let's not forget also that another actor is playing here a significant role, Mr. Oren, and that is Yemen, which continues to face its own hardships. Last night there was an emergency session of the UN Security Council, during the course of which the special envoy of the United Nations to Yemen provided a brief overview of the situation. And there he also highlighted that the Houthi or continued Houthi attacks against Israel, also the frustration of maritime shipping, is detrimental to Yemen, since it draws in also Israeli reactions that cripple much of the ports along the western coastline of that country. Are we expected to see a potential shift, or is this only going to escalate in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, the UN is a parallel universe. It doesn't matter whether they speak, they table resolutions, they veto, they vote. Doesn't matter. It's only brute force which is going to compel the Houthis to relent.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. General Sofrin, the E3 announced that they are giving Iran until the end of August to reinvigorate diplomacy and come to terms with the fact that they're not going to have an enrichment program, so to speak, something that the Iranians have reiterated just over the last 24 hours as a non-starter from their perspective. But nonetheless, the E3, namely Germany, Britain, and France, have said that unless that happens, they are going to trigger the snapback, which means a whole list of sanctions to include a UN Security Council sanction that bars Iran from enrichment.
Yes, this is a situation, but I heard today that about two pieces of information that can be applied to this situation in Iran. The first one is that the spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs hinted that they are negotiating with the Americans via somebody else, not directly with the Americans, but they are negotiating to get to some agreement. It is, of course, below the radars and below the table, and nobody really knows about that, only a few people. But nevertheless, he hinted that negotiations are going on indirectly. The second one was the deputy of the Minister of Foreign Affairs that said that Iran is considering to have some concessions in its nuclear program in return for removing all the sanctions that are being applied on Iran, and they will consider it. And they don't really mean that they're going to give up the capability to enrich uranium on Iranian soil, but they claim that this is only a temporary arrangement or temporary cessation until something else will be decided, and we'll see the mechanism next on. Of course, they know and are aware of the fact that the EU E3, meaning the three countries that you mentioned before, are really meaning to go and and activate the snapback mechanism, because it is going to expire at the end of September, and that means that the timetable is very short, and they have to do it. And this is what we call a very efficient weapon system that they have in their hand, and that can be applied on Iran. And the Iranians are aware of that, and therefore they are willing to go and get some concessions, as I mentioned before.
Indeed. From what I hear, the Iranians are actually quite alarmed by this move. And as you mentioned, indeed, the deputy foreign minister of Iran has mentioned that, but he also mentioned the fact that they're unwilling to negotiate directly unless the United States lifts sanctions, something that naturally is not going to happen. So we'll have to wait and see how this evolves. Professor Berman, we have roughly 2 minutes for your last statement on this issue, but a point of interest Are we still in a cycle of repeated rounds of violence or hostilities between Israel and Iran? Do you see such a prospect in the near future?
Jonathan, I may be currently in Israel, but I'm not a prophet. I can't tell what the next round will be. What strikes me is two things. First of all, the Iranian leadership ought to be very concerned about a significant step up in sanctions that its suffering economy might face, but apparently it's not worried enough to open up direct negotiations. This is the schizophrenia of the Iranian regime that is more committed to ideological positions than to the well-being of the country. The second is the fact that the E3, surprisingly, I'd say, have come out with this statement. I believe is an indication that they are coming to realize that a nuclear ballistic program in Iran is also a threat to Europe. Europe is a target for Iran. So I had not expected it, but England, France, Germany have shown an exceptional moment of courage.
Absolutely. I will also mention that the situation in southern Syria continues to be very troubling. The regime forces continue to besiege the governorate of Sweda, where the Druze are, where Christians are. Out of 31 villages that were razed to the ground, 2 of which were Christian villages, actually, we do see that they continue to control those villages. They're not pulling back, as was agreed upon in the ceasefire, and many of the bodies that were massacred in those villages remain on the streets as we speak. The water condition in that governorate is becoming worse, and so is the humanitarian condition, with medicine diminishing quite rapidly. This is something that we do need to highlight, and we will touch on in our next updates here also from Jerusalem. But I'd like to immediately thank Mr. Oren, General Sofrin, and Professor Berman for all of your valuable insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.